I think there's some audio somewhere. I'm not sure if someone wants to speak.
Sorry, sorry, Dr. Nzemeka, can you please switch off your video because it's really disturbing us? Thank you.
All right, no, thank you. Understandably, I'm dealing with academics, and unfortunately, I'm not an academic like I've mentioned. I don't have a particular sequence on how I'm going to structure this talk, but I am going to. There is something that's happening in terms of the mic. Can people please switch off the mics because it's kind of disturbing me on this side. All right. So as I was saying, upon meeting Mr. Mkai and getting exposed to the works that he has done, such as the SATU logo and many others, I got to realize that there are people who are crying foul play about artists dying poor, yet we have institutions which are producing T-shirts and stuff like that with a national symbol, yet the artist in question is not receiving, any compensation for the works that they are doing. And I later got to discover as well that he is the one who designed the South African flag, and I spoke with him to requesting him to document his works while he's still alive in an attempt to shift the narrative of embracing people when they are dead and gone. It was a very serious mission to convince him to talk about his work because he was a political activist who was used by the political formations of the time during the apartheid era to design protest banners, logos, and stuff like that. And the instruction was that he was not supposed to be known that he's the one who creates those symbols for obvious reasons, which is political reasons. And over time, upon the discovery that he's the man behind many symbols and nobody knows about it, I actually requested to document his work, which he refused. I had to beg him, which took me a process of 5 years to convince him to ensure that I am able to create a book artwork on his work so that the new generation and upcoming generation can be able to have somebody they can relate to. So that's how the journey went on how I met him. And from there, I started conducting lectures in South Africa and abroad, speaking about the works which he has done. And amongst those works is the South African flag, which is in the books of history, is attributed to a man called Frederick Bronner, a man who was a chairperson of the technical committee, which was responsible for receiving flag design submissions from artists in South Africa during the most important time of transition from apartheid to democracy. So it raised a very serious question on my end as to how can a person who was a chairperson and who was receiving all these designs be the one who's actually given credit for such work? And I continued asking those questions dating back to 2011, whilst Mr. Bronner was still alive, and he never actually defended himself to say that when he said he is not the designer of the flag, until 2019 when he passed on. So when he passed on in 2019, when our government was praising him as they usually do when people are dead and gone, people became worked out on social media to say, no, Bronner is not the designer. Mr. Mkai is the one who designed the flag. Then they started issuing statements to say Mr. Mkai and myself, Bandile Magibili, must not be listened to because the flag was designed by a patriot called Mr. Bronner. And if we want to claim the design of the flag, we need to make a submission to the Office of the State Herald, which is headed by a gentleman called Mr. Themba Mabaso. We did that with Mr. Mkai in 2019. We made the submission. And from there on, the matter was escalated and taken to legal representatives to actually assist us in the process of facilitating the process to instigate legal remedies, and also the rectification of history and how our history is actually archived in that regard. So what we did from there, we made a submission, and the Department of Arts and Culture, headed by Minister Natim Tetwa, they said they were going to go through their archives to check for any possibilities of submissions from Mr. Mkai. But initially they said Mr. Mkai does not even look like an artist, and there's no way that he made any submissions. And from their archives, they found 3 of his 5 submissions. And one of the submissions we made is the current flying flag, which was attributed to Mr. Brownwell, the man who was the chairperson of the technical committee responsible for receiving flag design submissions. So from there, through Mr. Mkai's attorneys, we made a Promotion of Access to Information Act request to get certain information from the department to enable Mr. Mkai to exercise his right to have his design of the flag to be under his name and stuff like that. So that is how this whole thing unfolded, and the questions that people have been asking throughout these years was the question of why was Mr. Mkai silent all the time and not speak about the fact that he designed and wait for Mr. Brownwell to die? And the answer was very simple to that, to say that we never waited for the death of Mr. Brownwell. We were always speaking about this, and the man did not defend himself when he was still alive. It is the black people in government who are actually the ones who are leading in defense of Mr. Brownwell. Then we ultimately, out of ignorance, through Mr. Mkai's attorneys, submitted an application to compel the department to actually issue the information which we requested. Amongst the information we requested was the names and all the individuals who made up the heraldry committee, including the recommendations to the president and the fact that was Mr. Brownwell also entitled to design after he has actually received design from artists. And we did receive recently a replying affidavit from the DDG of the department, but unfortunately they did not actually answer to our founding affidavit of the information we requested from the department. So it is important when we get these opportunities to speak on these platforms to actually highlight the failures which we are subjected to by the government, by academics as well, because you can't speak transition, of South Africa from apartheid to democracy without mentioning the national symbols. Now, the question is, how can somebody who was a chairperson of a selection board be the one who's assigned a role to design? For argument's sake, let's say Mr. Mkai was not the one who designed the flag, but how can we actually accept the fact that the chairperson is given the opportunity to design, whilst South Africans submitted and they said they received around 7,000 submissions from artists across South Africa? So that is the question that we have. And when we speak of what like research tells us regarding the flag, you'll find that on my end is that researchers have not done their job properly. And it's so unfortunate that we are not academics in order for us to challenge some of these things. So it is a very good opportunity and privilege to be on this platform to talk about what really unfolded. And I look forward to the time to to receive the questions. And one thing I need to also highlight is that since Mr. Mkai was the one who was given the task to design as a fine artist for political parties at the time, he got used to not being known that he's the one who designed certain symbols, you know. So it's always a question from people to say, why did he become silent? It is because he was used to the culture of not talking about the works, because at the time when those calls came, it was still apartheid. And we must also admit that white people at the time, they still had power, just like they still have now, because they are the ones who are pulling the strings behind closed doors. And that is actually the crux of the talk, to actually say that as South Africans, we need to be honest people if we really say that we want change in South Africa, because if we don't really practice truth whilst we want change, whatever change that we talk about is a mere illusion that we say we seek to achieve. So by me giving this talk and actually approaching academics, it is for me to highlight the failures which one has observed in terms of the academic, the scholars in particular, who are not challenging the status quo in terms of how everything is happening when it comes to the transition of South Africa, when it comes to the flag. And we look forward to what is going to unfold as far as the case is concerned of Mr. Mkai versus the office of Minister Natim Teta, which is at the High Court in Pretoria. That is basically, Doc Laszlo, that is what the talk was about. It was about the intellectual property theft of the South African flag, and we've got to be careful how we preserve our history and heritage, because if we keep quiet and not speak about these things because we fear to be on the bad books of those who actually handle what do they call this thing, who control our mindset and what we do. I think I should end it there and look forward to the questions.
Okay, thank you, Bandile, for that short but concise overview of the case and making your statement. And thank you for the time to talk to us today about Mr. Mkai's work and how this particular case concerning the conceptualization and production of the South African national flag fits in our history about democratic transition and post-apartheid politics. So let's now move on to Professor Ramupi, who has read the paper that you sent to him and has been listening here. And we look forward to hearing what Professor Ramupi has to say about this. And then we will open up the space for debate and discussion. Professor Ramupi, please go ahead.
Greetings, colleagues, from wherever you are. Bandile Magibili's paper, To Be Black, South Africa Flag Plagiarized Heritage, it's a very important discussion. And Bandile, I was smiling or laughing when you introduced yourself as a graduate from University of Involvement. That's very, very, very interesting title. I also want to go to that university. The pointers that we are really making, the reasons we are trying to point to us, the reasons why artists die poor, okay? And when I was reading your paper, I was happy to see, which you didn't mention in the presentation, that this artist, art was a weapon of the struggle during apartheid, during the liberation struggle. So this artist contributed to the liberation struggle, right? But when 1994 came, or negotiations, period of negotiations came in the early 1990s, you argue in your paper that they were marginalized, okay? So you also talked about that it took 5 years to get to convince the artist Thembani Hastings Mkai to get involved, right? I just want to, when you respond, I just want you to say a bit why you think it took him that long to get involved in this case, okay? And before I get into your presentation, I want to refer two important cases which are very, very relevant to this case. And when you do your further work, I want you to look at them. The first one is the who designed Moses Mabhida Stadium, you know, in that famous soccer stadium in Durban. And this is from the Sunday Tribute. So I'm just going to read so that we can get into the issues of your case by looking at other related cases. So back in 2004, when Sibusiso Nene was in grade 11, Sibusiso made headlines for his stadium model crafted in wire. His family believes he was the creative genius behind this stadium design, who was not honored, claimed the former Tekwini mayor, Obed Molaba. In an interview with Molaba, he said one of his regrets was not following up with Sibusiso. One of the good things that happened during my time as the mayor was that Moses Mabhida was the Moses Mabhida Stadium. I will never forget this young man who came with a model crafted in wires, which is the concept of the Moses Mabhida Stadium. I referred him to technical team who were in charge of the stadium. Indeed, the whole framework you see of the stadium came from that child from Hammersdale. It was his idea. Okay. The reason why I'm pointing at this case, I'm just trying, when I was reading your paper, I was just trying to think of other cases that are similar, that falls into the case of the South African flag, okay? That's the first one, and he didn't get anything. Unfortunately, Sibusiso Nene passed away in 2019, so he didn't even see the completion of Moses Mabhida Stadium. But the papers and the city of Johannesburg, the city of eThekwini, the engineers were picking up every day from school or home so that he can help them with the design. Okay, so in that case, it's clear that he was the inventor of that stadium, but he's not recognized at all, okay? He was not paid, his name doesn't appear there. So that's a failed case. I'm not sure when you respond if you'll say this flag case by Hastings Mkai is a failed case because we are still having a court case. But the second one, which is successful, is the Vodacom case of Please Call Me inventor Nkosana Makete, who created the Please Call Me to Vodacom, the idea in 2000, right? This is a very successful case because after 20 years, from 2021 to last year, 2021, the High Court has determined that he created that Please Call, and then he needs to be paid. In this case, again, similar to your case, the CEO of Vodacom claimed that he was the designer of that Please Call Me. Okay, so this one is successful. He's going to be paid from 2021 to 2001 to 2021. So for 20 years, he's going to be paid all the money, 5% of the money that Vodacom made in this Please Call invention. Okay, so those cases are important. When you go back to work on this project, you need to look at them and maybe interview them as well. So going to your, it was not a digression, it was very, very important. So we know that there are other cases as well. So in relation to these two cases and with your case, there are really some loopholes, okay? Not from your side, but from Frederick Brownwell, the chairperson of the commission, who was also the convener of the technical committee for the flag design submission. There is no, I looked at 2 articles in addition to your paper. There is no terms of reference for the committee, okay? If you can comment on that, it is not clear, it is not mentioned at all. The point that you mentioned that he was, okay, in my case, because I'm a footballer, I think that Bronwell was the player and the referee, you know, at the same time, which you cannot be. But maybe you can talk more about the terms of reference if there were terms of reference, okay? The other issue that I find very, very important is the Department of Arts and Culture is not responsive to this case. Why is that the case? Why are they not getting involved in this case? Okay, they just want this case to die as they are part of government. And the first point I wanted to start with, which escaped me, is that the national flag is supposed to establish great nation building, right? But in this case, this paper and the contents of this paper and what is happening, if it's going to be a national public debate, if it goes to the courts, like the 2 cases that I've mentioned, it is dividing the nation as it unfolds. You also mentioned that Mkai created artworks during apartheid. So his artworks was a weapon during the struggle. And he did not want to be known, right? And in this case, it took him 5 years for you to convince him to talk. And in your first page, you also mentioned you tried to link culture with the anti-apartheid struggle, where you talk about Miriam Makeba and Nelson Mandela, who became the symbols, you know, of democracy and equality, as opposed, this is a quote, to communism and savagery, okay? But there, I made a comment that we must also remember that the apartheid government and the American government and British government called, you know, they called Mandela and they called Miriam Makeba and those who associated with them as communists, you know, as terrorists. So all these sideshows are very, very important when you talk of issues of culture. And also, you also mentioned during, okay, when we're about to go to negotiations, there was the lifting of the sports boycott. That I think is very, very important, where you mentioned that the racialist, what is it? The national symbol that separated us were boycotted, right? So we needed a new symbol that can be inclusive. But at the same time, what happened with this case, there were divisions, there were exclusions, right? The artists who fought, who contributed during the apartheid struggle were, in your paper, you argue, were marginalized, and they continue to be marginalized. And that's the reason why you say that artists continue to die poor, right? Other 2 points that I want to mention here. Towards the end, Bandile, you talk about, so this paper is really publicizing or is making us conscious of the status quo that you argue that ourselves as academics, we do not address, right? The intellectual property theft that you talk about that is happening in this paper. For me, I think while this is such a critical 6-page that you have presented, I'm interested to also hear the persons who were the committee members of this technical committee, if you can be able to interview them, or the lawyers, your lawyers can, the lawyers of this case can interview them and hear them. And in the other paper that I looked at, your lawyer here mentions where is it? Yeah. Mkai's lawyer, Joel Baipi, says that they were hoping that the department will cooperate, and they are not cooperating. And he also referred to the terms of reference, which I mentioned, and I quote him here. It will be very strange that his own submission was then selected. But the fact is, we have to look at what the process agreed to was. If the process was that members of the committee were allowed to submit 2 out of their patriotic interests. Remember, Brownwill was also a South African, so he had the right to submit. Then there is nothing wrong with that, or being the one who is chosen. But the lawyers are questioning the terms of reference that I mentioned. What were the terms of reference? As a convener, as a chairperson of the technical committee, was he allowed to submit? And out of the 7,000 designs that were submitted, you mentioned, and in the 2 additional articles that I looked at, that nothing was taken from that, right? The 7,000 designs, and Bronwyn made a submission. It's like at the 11th hour, that's my interpretation, he was able to submit a design. What happened to the other 7,000? Is there anything that he has copied? Is there anything that he has plagiarized from other designs that were submitted to him? So in my view, we need to understand the terms of reference. You cannot be a player and be a referee at the same time. And I think this is the case with Frederick Bronwyn in this case. What other points? The last point I can mention, Dr. Lazo. Yeah, the last point, which I've mentioned it, but not in these terms, is there was a conflict of interest in this case. Brownwill was member of the Department of Arts and Culture, the Heraldry division. All these submissions were coming to him, and he also submitted at the end, not at the beginning. So if they say there were 7,000 submission of flags, it means his was the what? 7,000 flags plus 1 is how much? 7,001. So his was the last. So these are the issues that I think needs to be looked at, so that this case can be as clear as, I know it's a new case, it can be as clear as the Vodacom case and be as clear as the Moses Mabhida case. In those 2 cases, it's clear that Sibusiso Nene is the designer of Moses Mabhida Stadium, but it was not credited for, as you are arguing, Mkai, in this case of the South African flag, he was not credited for. And in the case of Vodacom, Makene won that case. He's going to be compensated 5% for the past 20 years of police call. I will leave it there. Chair, thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Ramuki, for your insights and interventions. Bandile, do you want to comment on some of Professor Ramuki's questions that he posed to you, or suggestions that he makes before we move on to the audience?
Yes, please. Just want to comment on the 5 years. Why it took me 5 years to convince Mr. Mkai to actually compose a book on his works. You must remember that he has it's protest art which he has at his home, which I've actually profiled in this book called To Be Black. And one of the reasons is that it is paintings he created at the time, paintings of pain. So he actually asked me questions to say that if like he used to say to me, he cannot speak about his works, because if I say he must speak about his works, it's like saying that he must relive the pain of the time when he created those works. And then I told him that at some point when I was about to give up to compile this book, I told him that he's a very selfish human being, because how can he be working for the Department of Arts and Culture, a department which is actually designed to actually protect and archive the works of artists, yet we don't find a single of his works from the very same department, you know? So what is it saying about the entire department? So eventually he gave in, and then I started writing to him. It was a very tough exercise for me to compose the book and getting him to speak on the media, because when he creates his work, he does not necessarily do stuff to be known, but I showed him the bigger picture. And I must also, on the other side, also I have also a very mild, criticism against him, like many other individuals, who are in positions of influence, where people they are more protective of their political organizations than they are about the future of South Africa. I'll make an example by saying that when I persisted to say it's important that we talk, and his argument was also that he does not want to collide with his own comrades, which is the case with a lot of people in all these spaces, that they protect their comrades than the future. Then I told him that it is not about comrades, but it's about the future of artists. So if we have somebody as great as you, and then we wait for you to die and then create monuments, we won't have a point of reference to refer to say, okay, we also have great Black artists who have amazing works that we can look up to. Then eventually everything actually came out to where we are now and what we are doing. So my comment is on those bases, and also in terms of the committee, the committee which was responsible, that is the information that Mr. Mkai, through his lawyers, is trying to find out, because even this matter of the flag was poorly publicized, because everything revolves around one individual, which is Mr. Frederick Brunel. He also has a thesis which he got from the University of Pretoria. If I'm not mistaken, it was in 2015. So you have a thesis where you write about yourself. Like, it's a very questionable exercise, this whole thing. So that's my comment. I hope I was able to actually shed some light for Prof. Ramupi on that matter.
Okay, and you can take this conversation further with Professor Ramupi a bit later. But let's open the questions up to the floor. Normally we take questions of 3, and you can either raise your hand or put your question in the chat box, and I will read it out loud. So the first person as a member of our audience that wants to ask a question is Luvuyo. Luvuyo, please go ahead.
Thanks a lot, Doc, and good afternoon, and thanks a lot to the university for hosting this session. Probably, Doc, it's not a question, but a comment, and a comment that seeks to magnify the point that Bandile is making, and also the difficulties that he had come across with respect to Mr. Mkai being able to ultimately avail himself and his works for the purpose of To Be Black ultimately. Look, we operated in conditions not very easy at all. And I'm talking as a former comrade to Hastings, and I'm talking as an ex-person who experienced his work, as a person who actually was part of those who had to give him sometimes instructions to draw the actual artwork that was attacking the apartheid state at a very difficult time as university students. So some of which we would have classified as underground work. So you wouldn't be able then, as a person in himself, to break the code of those particular arrangements. He definitely had to accept that it would be difficult. But I think the point just separate from that is that we are dealing with a transformation process which seeks to also deal with the issues that are codified as intellectual property and whatever you call them in the structural policy realm. But also you're dealing with the existence of dominance by particular, cultures and values. One, people who have been, advantaged to follow and understand the actual usage of those instruments of writing and being in the public space and writing of their products, but also would then exploit those who are not in that open space. To date, as we listen to the case, I'm sure it will come very clear. Even if you could be arguing that the government system was not matured enough to a state where there could have been clear conflict of interest, but the reality is you couldn't find this referee and player, particularly to come at the very late stage. I mean, if any of us have gone through to be black, those particular artworks in there, I have a very direct relationship with them because I have seen these comrades working on these works, and I know exactly. He's not actually, we can really list all of them, even in the student movement, the transitions between your new SAS and SANSCO then into the SASCO that we have today. He had made very, valuable contributions in artworking there. So I'm saying that part of the transformation we need to be dealing with, particularly for our artists, is actually the understanding of this codification and the laws that govern, how you develop your products and putting them into the marketplace, but also how you actually ensure that your royalties and ownership of those royalties is actually understood. And you can go further, Prof, on the points Noel you were making earlier on. Prof Newell, the point about, you can take the example of Brenda Fass's son. And I think his recent coverage and even what had happened to the mother, these are realities of a South African system in the arts and culture that requires, continual check in transforming and ensuring that it really is favoring all of South Africans. Thanks a lot, Prof.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions or comments coming from the audience? And please try and also try and keep it short so that other people do have the time. Okay, Dr. Nzemeka and then Dr. Sebolao. Please go ahead, Dr. Nzemeka. Dr. Nzemeka? We can't hear you. Right. Let's move on to Dr. Sebolao. Can you please ask your question?
Thank you so much, Dr. Laszlo. It's really not a question, but a comment. And thanks to Bandile for this inspirational talk and Prof. Ramoki for your, inspiring questions. But I just want to say, as a university or as a faculty specifically, maybe based on probably what Luvu has just said, is that maybe we need to consider this and say, what is our role then to make sure that we prevent such things from happening and protect our artists, especially that we have a Department of Fine Arts, we've got drama and theater, we've got music. We will probably be faced with such challenges. We probably need to think and say, what can we do as academics within this faculty to protect our artists? That's all I wanted to comment on. Thanks, Bandile.
Hey, thank you. Dr. Nzemeka, do you want to try again? If not, are there any other questions?
Okay.
Yes, Dr. Nzameka, please go ahead. Okay, I'm not sure what's happening there. Let's move on to first Dr. Masakure, and then Dr. Shitofire, and then Kingdom Mosh. I can't see the full name, so Kingdom. Let's move on to Dr. Masakure first.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Bandile and Prof. Ramopi, for the discussion. Bandile, may you please speak a bit more about the terms of reference, if you can? Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Masakure, and then Dr. Shitofire.
Thank you very much. My question is, thank you very much, Bandile, for such an interesting conversation. And thank you very much for Professor Ramopi for the discussion there. My question is also related to the terms of reference, but in a slightly different way. What is since I know this is not your forte in terms of your discussion in the paper, but since you are talking about the flag, what is the symbolic? Have you ever tried to find out, at least from the artist, the one who did the flag, what is the symbolic value of the flag to South Africa? What is it invoking, and does it do so? And if is there some political connotations to what the flag represents? And if so, does it have any bearing on how this case has unfolded? Thanks very much.
Thank you. And then the last question for this round is by Kingdom Moshunyane. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Bandile, for the work and for bringing it to the public in the manner that that you had brought. I'm of the opinion that perhaps this opens avenue for further discussion and also further assistance, because this is a matter of great importance. So, but I've got two questions. The other one is an observation. In the Department of Sports and Culture annual performance 2021, 2022, it seems as if this matter was brought up, but it seems as if the department is of the opinion that the allegation of intellectual property infringement is incorrect. So my first question is, has this communicated directly to the contesting parties? That's number one. Number two, it seems as if the Department of Arts and Culture seems to be displaying a cold stance of indifference and denial in terms of the contested property infringement. Now, my second question is there is a case happening, but in terms of the fact that intellectual property plays a vital role in the physical well-being of the individual and those surrounding him and everybody trying to protect the individual. What is the state of the team and of the people involved, of the artist, Mr. Kai himself, yourself as an activist, and everybody else? And perhaps the last question would be, what are you asking from the community that now the matter is being brought to platforms like this? What is the ask? Are we like Bob Marley saying, are we building an army to defend some of our own? What is the ask for help? I hope you've got that. But thank you very much for bringing this work, and I would like, in a way, to be involved in some certain way, in some little way. That is why my last question is, what is the ask? And also that then relates to the well-being, because it's a fight that cannot be taken alone, and we need soldiers to build just army. Thank you very much, Chair, for excuse me for blabbering a lot.
No worries. Thank you for those questions. Bandile, please go ahead and feel free to answer them or provide further feedback and context.
Okay, I think let me just give feedback or context. When the call came, it requested that since we are transitioning from apartheid to democracy, there needs to be a symbol which is going to unite all the political parties that were fighting at the time during apartheid to come under one symbol. So one of those political parties will be your PAC, ANC, Inkatha, etc. So according to Mr. Mkai, the symbolism of the flag was that it was uniting, it was combining all the flags, and one of the inspiration you got was from Jamaica. And if you look at the flag on the left, you'll see that there are those colors which you find on the flag of Jamaica when he was doing his research in terms of flags. That's how it all came about. And I also need to mention that from the submissions that they found from their archives, except the one which is flying, which they did not send, is that those flags which they sent back to Mr. Mkai after they've done their so-called research from the Department of Arts and Culture, all those flags, they have 6 colors, which is the significance. It's all the colors that you find in the national flag. And the one which is flying is the one that is not part of the ones which they actually returned to Mr. Mkai. I hope I was able to respond to that. And one thing I also need to highlight is that we were never in a position where we were saying that we were fighting for the flag of South Africa. It was the plight of Black artists in particular. So this whole thing about submissions to the portfolio committee, arts and culture, etc., came after the death of the gentleman called Frederick Brownell, because they were starting to defend him. And then I went to my archive to show them that this thing has been on the public domain since 2011. We've done interviews, we've done ABCD. This man never defended himself. It's only you Black people who are fighting us in terms of this whole thing. And then in terms of the infringement, I think I've already mentioned, what we got back, because the question that even the people who are in the legal space, because they are not creative, the only question is about proof. Because back then we did not have these advanced technologies where if you design something, you copy and have copies in anticipation that somebody is going to steal your work. So Mr. Mkai was never in that position at the time when he sent his works through. So we need to be creative and think outside of the box or the psychological defeat that we are in as a people. And then in terms of the emotional state, I think I'm in a better position, and I'm very grateful that there are individuals who vibrate in the same frequency as us, that we are able to get to speak with scholars, academics, even though we are just graduates from the University of Involvement. So in terms of this whole fight, on my end, my emotional state is better, and it's becoming better because there's a little bit of light that there are people who care about the future and etc. So I am fine. I think Mr. Mkai is also going through the healing process of what he went through for being sidelined from all his works which he has created. The cry for help is there needs to be a legislation which can be introduced in order for artists not to die poor. One of those legislations must go along with, if there's a national symbol. Look at SATU, for instance. How many T-shirts are being printed on a daily basis? Printers are making a lot of money. The designer shops are making a lot of money, but the artist is not making any cent. So I have identified the problem and understood the problem, because in South Africa, we are all seen as potential musicians, soccer players, and actors. So for fine artists and other art forms, they are neglected as if they are non-existent. So the cry is for the introduction of a legislation to ensure that artists, they benefit from their work. And then it needs to be legislation for all these production houses which are producing staff who are making millions understandably that you can be a patriot designing a flag of South Africa because there was no money attached to that competition. It was just people doing stuff out of their patriotic interest. But that does not mean that because you're a patriot, the flag is flying internationally. Yet when you die poor. So how do we justify that as policy? Those people are policymakers, researchers, etc. So I hope I was able to answer the question regarding the question which I received.
Okay, thank you. Let's have a short final round of questions. Anybody in the audience would like to ask Bandile something about this topic or comment? We have Aubrey. Aubrey, please go ahead. And then we have Professor Ramupi again. And then I will abuse my position as discussant and also ask one or two final questions. So Aubrey, please go ahead. You can ask your question. Remember that you're muted, so please unmute yourself. Aubrey? I can't hear you, Aubrey. Can anybody hear Aubrey?
No.
Okay. Then let's move on to Professor Ramupi. Aubrey, if you can try and find out what is wrong with your microphone, then we can take your question. But let's go to Professor Ramupi first.
Yeah, Bandile, I just forgot to mention, you also talked about state capture not being new, not being a new thing. I think it's a very critical point that, because also in our book on Robben Island, we also had a case where we were just saying the state capture in the Jacob Zuma era presidency, it doesn't start there, right? So it's interesting that in the negotiations, we have identified a state capture, and maybe we can still go backward. I mean, look at state capture, I mean, post-94 and even before apartheid. But I thought it was an important point that I didn't mention, and I needed to comment you on that. Thank you. Thank you, Laszlo.
Okay, it seems that Audrey has lowered her hand, so I'll ask my question. The first one is just to add to the list of similar cases that Professor Ramupi has listed during his discussion. You could perhaps also include the Apartheid Museum and the contestation around whose idea was it. I think that's also a case that reminded me of this particular one, and then see what you can learn from these cases and how the public reacts, how government reacts, etc. And then I would like you to talk a little bit more about what the official history of designing and selecting the flag design was. What is the official narrative around this process, and how do they explain and justify the head of the selection committee designing the winning flag design? So that's one question. And then perhaps more from an academic point of view, how can we place this particular case in a broader history of South Africa's democratic transition and early post-apartheid South African politics? What does it add to understanding about this crucial moment in our history? So then Nzemeka, you also have your hand up. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much, sir. Can you hear me, sir?
Yes.
Can you hear me, sir?
Yes, loud and clear.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. I am glad to be here. Greetings from Nigeria. This is a very important topic, and it's not peculiar to the South African history. I'm sure you can still hear me, sir. You can still hear me?
Yes, you can hear
Hello,
you.
sir. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
You can hear me, sir?
Yes, we can.
Very good. So it's not peculiar to South Africa. In the case of Nigeria, there was a young man who designed the Nigerian flag. And not until that was in 1960, and not until he was very close to death before he was recognized and was given a national award, the Order of the Niger. And that has to do with close to 5 million naira. Again, there was somebody who composed the Nigerian national anthem, Arise, O Compatriots. He was not remembered, not until he was also very close to death. So the issue of South Africa is not strange in history. But what is strange here is that the people refused to recognize the man, Mukai, amidst plethora of evidence, even though he had no symbol on the map or trademark. But living history made us to understand that there could be traces, there could be sources through which we can be able to pinpoint a historical actor. That is my contribution, sir. Thank you so very much.
Thank you very much for that. Bandile, please go ahead. Aubrey, unfortunately, we do have to wrap up, so you can put your comment in the chat and Bandile can have a look at it and perhaps comment on it. But Bandile, please go ahead.
I think I've missed Prof. Ramopi's question because I disconnected for a few minutes. I'm not sure if I should comment on the question he was raising because I didn't really hear what he was saying.
I think it was more of a comment than a question. Is that right?
Yes, yes, it was a comment, but Bandile, I was just commenting you on raising the state capture, that it's not a new thing, okay? And I was commenting that it's good that we are mentioning it in the negotiation period before 1994. We also identified that in our book on Robben Island that there was a state capture there. Yeah, so I just wanted to say it was a good point that you mentioned, and I forgot to mention it. Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you so much. I am grateful for the opportunity and look forward to other academics hosting this kind of talks so we are able to spread as much awareness as we possibly can, even if tomorrow we are no more. At least there's a lot of people who are able to know what is happening so that we're able to protect the future of other artists than what is happening now, because we have people who are in spaces who lack capacity to execute what they do. For instance, as a developer in the arts from the grassroots level, you find that the very institutions which are designed to actually empower financial and otherwise, they don't make use of the skills that we have, which they lack. Instead, they become intimidated because they are deployed politically and they don't know nothing about the space they're in. So it's about time that the little knowledge which we have, you make use of them, and the little space of influence you occupy, make the best that you empower as many people as you possibly can. With those few words, I am very grateful to each and every individual present or not present who actually ensured that one is able to present this case. At least it's sparked a little bit of confidence in me to believe that at least we still have genuine people out there. We hope that it's going to be the same thing for other people as well, because there's more that we can share, we people who are practical on the ground, not these beautiful policies, written on papers by people, because thinking and writing is easy as tying a shoelace, but being involved is a all different situation. So with those few words, I'm very grateful to every person who tuned in and those who are yet to watch the recording of this presentation. I am really, really grateful and thankful, hopeful there will be more platforms where we are able to talk about this because these spaces are, many spaces are actually co-opted because they are occupied by people who are comrades who instigate each other on the background not to accommodate truth, yet they say they want change in South Africa. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And thank you very much to everybody in the audience for taking the time to come and listen to our seminar presentation. I hope that you will join us in the future. We will communicate with you via email what the next presentation is going to be, but it will only be next year, as this was our last seminar presentation for the year. So I wish you a good afternoon and hope to see you back here sometime in the future. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you. Okay.